a look at a portion of the failed floating pier that the United States constructed off the coast of Gaza to essentially circumvent Israel's blockade of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Now, the Pentagon has just announced that the aid delivery pier, which the US government spent $320 million on in taxpayer money, is going to be shut down for repairs because it literally broke apart. That's why you saw one portion of that floating pier off the coast of Gaza. Now, that marks the second incident that has unfortunately interrupted the flow of aid coming in from the pier in many weeks. Now, the first shutdown actually occurred not too long ago when a large group of starving and desperate Palestinians had basically rushed aid trucks coming off of the pier. And understand that this is a problem that's been completely manufactured, created by the blockade of humanitarian aid. These are starving individuals who have been cut off from the rest of the world, who have been cut off from the food, water, fuel, and medical supplies that they need to survive. And a Palestinian man was killed as a result of that. There were also all sorts of issues with weather. In fact, the more recent incident where the pier broke apart had to do with bad weather and horrible sea conditions. That's what damaged the pier. American officials had been hoping that the sea surges would not start until later this year in the summer. Now the pier needs repairs, and the Pentagon claims that, the repairs might take about a week. But even when the pier was functioning, it still was not able, that was not the avenue in which we were able to get sufficient or adequate aid into the Gaza Strip. We still were not able to provide what Palestinians desperately need to survive.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you.
Now, Sabrina Singh, who is the deputy press secretary for the Defense Department, told the press the following. The rebuilding and repairing of the pier will take at least over a week, and following completion will need to be re-anchored to the coast of Gaza. Thus, upon completion of the pier repair and reassembly, the intention is to re-anchor the temporary pier to the coast of Gaza and resume humanitarian aid to the people who need it most. Now, again, I really think it's important to repeat what I said earlier about why the US is attempting to construct a pier, a floating pier off the coast of Gaza in the first place. Now, Gaza has 7 points of entry, and not a single one of them is being utilized to its maximum capacity to get enough humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Now, why is that? Well, because you have Israeli settlers sabotaging humanitarian aid deliveries. We've seen videos of that. You also have the Israeli government very much intentionally serving as an obstacle of entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. So US taxpayers have to foot the bill to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars and more funding now that we have to repair this floating pier in order to get humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people. In other words, our ally, our strongest ally in the Middle East, is standing in the way of allowing aid organizations to deliver humanitarian aid to starving, dehydrated Palestinians who are also in huge portions of the Gaza Strip already suffering from famine. Now, the pier is not only draining taxpayer money. I would venture to say that that's actually a smaller problem when you consider the fact that American lives are also at risk. In an earlier incident, 3 US soldiers taking part in the Gaza Pier mission were also injured, one of whom was in critical condition and evacuated to a hospital in Israel. Now, I've been looking for some explanation about how these injuries came about for these members of our military. There has been no word on what caused the injuries, but the injuries would not have happened if the US government didn't feel the need to build a floating pier off the coast of Gaza to get humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip because of the fact that Israel is blocking the entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. Now, the pier also risks further escalation with basically further escalation in this war. And Hamas has said that this is really nothing more than an attempt for the US to engage in PR, to cover up some of what Israel is up to. And I actually happen to agree with them on that. I mean, the US knows that they're building this pier specifically due to the fact that Israel's blocking humanitarian aid. So Hamas does have a point when they say, listen, this isn't going to facilitate adequate humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, and this is really just a PR stunt by the United States, and it's a costly one to US taxpayers and to members of our military who have been tasked with essentially dealing with the construction of that pier. And look, to make matters worse, the pier was already, even before it was damaged, it was already a miserable failure. So in the first week of operations, only 820 tons of aid was delivered through the pier, of which around 2/3 reached distribution points within Gaza. That sounds like a lot, right? Except it's not. That is roughly equivalent to 71 truckloads, which is far below the initial target of 90 truckloads a day. And about 15%, just 15% of the estimated minimum daily need for a population of more than 2 million people facing crisis level acute food insecurity. So why did only 2/3 of the trucks reach the destination? Well, UN officials have stated that desperate Gazans, because they've gone without food for so long and because they're so desperate, ended up hijacking the remaining third of the trucks. And that is because the UN says some 1.1 million people in Gaza, nearly half the population, face catastrophic levels of hunger, and that the territory is on the brink of famine. The brink of famine line actually annoys me at this point, because as humanitarian aid organizations have already stated, the northern half of the Gaza Strip is already suffering from famine. And keep in mind that now that Israel is carrying out military operations, aerial bombardments, and shelling in Rafah, where Palestinians were told to go evacuate to shelter in for safety, well, all those people are being displaced again, and they're being displaced to areas that are further from the Rafah border, and it's harder to distribute food to them. So it's been a disaster for Palestinians, a disaster in terms of how the United States government looks on the international stage, given the fact that rather than hold our ally accountable for blocking humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, the US decides, okay, well, we'll find a workaround. Let's work around our ally, since our ally is serving as such an obstacle. And let's spend hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money in order to build this floating pier. It makes Biden appear pathetic, because let's keep it real, he is pathetic, but he's not the only one. Most of our politicians will do exactly what Biden's doing, if not worse, to be quite frank. And it's because, God forbid, any of them have the audacity to call a spade and criticize Israel for what they are doing. But I am happy to report that there are some within the Biden administration who have a conscience, who do not want to be embarrassed and humiliated on the international stage. And these individuals, many of whom are within the State Department, have decided, I've been a career official within the State Department, a veteran of this department, but I'm gonna go ahead and resign because I actually have a conscience.
If you enjoyed this video, that's because of our members. They make us independent, they make us strong, and they make us honest. Become a member today by hitting the join button below.